Assalamualaikum everyone, Megan Wyatt here from Wives of Jannah, and I want to encourage you to make 2017 your year of fearless vulnerability. And fearless vulnerability is something that I teach, it's something that I practice. All of my work at Wives of Jannah revolves around this idea of choosing vulnerability, not just to some degree, but fearlessly choosing vulnerability with yourself and in your relationship and between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, we think about vulnerability often as a weakness. We're afraid that if we're vulnerable, whether it's if we show our feelings, if we touch our own feelings, if we acknowledge our feelings, somehow we're going to get more hurt, somehow we're going to have more pain, somehow people are going to take advantage of us. Then maybe it's your spouse, you're afraid if you really tell them what you think or what you feel, they're going to hurt you with it, they're going to use it against you. But the reality is, when we hold things in, and we keep things in, or we don't acknowledge pain that's there, or we don't acknowledge desires that are there, or we don't tap into, the potential of where we could go if we release these things, we are in pain. So if you're thinking of, your relationship and you kind of were able to look at a scale of 1 to 10, how much passion do you have? How much love and feelings of love do you feel that you have? How much, friendship do you have? What kind of joy do you have? What's your level of communication? I'm going to tell you that the thread that connects all of these things together is going to be vulnerability. It's going to come back to how vulnerable are you? And of course, yes, also how vulnerable is your spouse? How vulnerable are you with yourself, with your creator, and with your significant other? Because it starts with you first. You have to be willing as an individual to, look inside yourself. What are you feeling? What are you needing? What are you desiring? If you're not even willing to acknowledge to your own self your feelings or your fears, your insecurities or your desires, what you really want, there's no way that your spouse is going to figure it out. There's no way that your relationship's going to be able to be more fulfilling at that level because you yourself haven't looked within. Who are you really? What do you desire? What do you want more of? What do you want to create within your relationship and within your life? And then between you and Allah, when you think about the dua that you make and the things that you ask, your dua are also going to be connected to your level of vulnerability with yourself. How deep you go with yourself is how deep you're willing to go with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever you're willing to acknowledge, whatever, again, your fears, insecurities, your needs, your wants, your desires, your dua is going to be made up of the things that you're willing to acknowledge. And I can tell you, after working with Muslims for a lot of years, that many people, their dua are not as deep as they could be because they're afraid to acknowledge to themselves and in front of their Lord the things that they're really feeling, thinking, or wanting, or desiring. So vulnerability becomes, when you take it into your life, it becomes the thing that actually expands and opens you up to greater emotion, deeper dua, greater connection with your Lord, and also greater confidence in yourself because you're willing to say yes to the things that are inside of you. The good, the bad, and the quote-unquote the ugly, right? The things that we don't even like. But the reality is you have to let those things have a space. If you're hurt, if you're upset, if you're jealous, if you're insecure, if you're not feeling good today, whatever it is, it's okay to acknowledge that. By acknowledging it, you're giving yourself the opportunity to deal with it, to make a conscious strategic decision. What do you want to do about it? What reframe do you want to make about these things? But when you try to hide it and ignore it, they come back to haunt you. And then finally, with your spouse. How can you be more vulnerable with your spouse? And vulnerable does not mean, by the way, being more open about your anger and being more critical and blaming your spouse more and telling them more about what they're doing wrong. That's the opposite of what I'm talking about, because that's actually not getting to the vulnerable truth. First things is vulnerability means to actually bring more good, to be more willing to say, I love you, to be more willing to say thank you, to be more willing to say you look good today, to be more willing to say, you know what, I just had this really beautiful memory of when we were married, or I had this thought of you from last week. It's being willing to actually expand and express more of the good things in your relationship. And then when you get to the not so good stuff, right? The stuff that's hurting, the agitations, the arguments, the fights, vulnerability means to learn how to go beyond the ego, get back into your heart and talk about what's really going on. Now, if this is something where you're going, but how do we do that? I have training programs for that. So you can totally hit up my website and learn more about that. And, wivesofjannah.com/programs. You can message me about that. But just as an encouragement for you to consider, how much more vulnerable could you become? Just first with yourself, okay? Then with you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then with your spouse. The more vulnerability, the greater strength you have as a person because you don't hide from you. When you look yourself in the mirror, you know exactly who you are. The more confident, the more confidence you can have, or to become a more confident person rather, because you're not hiding anything from yourself. You're fully embracing who you are. You're fully embracing what is, and you're not trying to run away or make excuses for it. Just this is who you are, and this is where you're at, and this is what you're going to do about it. And then vulnerability with your spouse, being able to say more of the good stuff and being to open up and not being afraid that if you show too much love, you'll get taken advantage of. Or if you give too much, then, they're just gonna, some people say, oh, they're gonna get a big ego. Give, because the whole point of love is to be a person that gives, to give consistently, to give fearlessly, to not hold back whatsoever. So my 2017 challenge for all of you is to consider vulnerability in your relationship, bring more of it into your life, and see what it can do for you. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.